Forward TV. The world is thinking.
We're very lucky this evening to have John Perkins with us, who most of you know probably from his previous book, Economic Hitman, and he has his new book here, The Secret History of the American Empire, which he'll be talking about tonight and answering any of your questions. So without further ado, John, where'd he go? Okay, John.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be at Cody's. Wow, what a great place to be. It's a bookstore I've shopped at many times in my life. My wife is from Kensington, just down the street here. My father-in-law was one time chief architect at Bechtel Corporation. So I know this area and I know Bechtel very well. It's wonderful to be here with all of you tonight. Such a beautiful night. I suspect a few of you were as tempted as I was not to show up here tonight. So I would expect that many of you, like me, here tonight are feeling that this is a very challenging world that we're living in. I just happen to have the good fortune of having dinner tonight with Mike Brune, who's the president of Rainforest Action Network, and his 2-year-old daughter, Olivia. I think they're here someplace. Mike and Olivia, are you? Oh, they just took a trip to the bathroom. Okay. And it just really brought to my mind being with this 2-year-old daughter of a man who's doing amazing things in the world through Rainforest Action Network, that we really have an incredible responsibility on our hands right now. We have this challenging world with climate change. There he is, Mike and Olivia. I just mentioned that we had dinner together tonight and who you are, and there's Olivia and there's Mike. Because I have a feeling you may not make it through the whole thing tonight. But in any case, what I was saying is that having dinner with a 2-year-old and a man who's done such amazing things to make this a better world really brings home the urgency of what we're facing today. And tonight's going to be a very optimistic speech. I know we're going to change the world. I know we're going to make it a better world for Olivia and every 2-year-old, every child being born in Ethiopia. We've got some Ethiopians here with us tonight also. And with the ladies from Ethiopia, stand up for just a second, please. Thank you. In order for Olivia, Mike's daughter, to grow up in a peaceful, sustainable, and stable world, every child being born in Ethiopia and in Indonesia and in Bolivia also has to have that expectation. And so tonight, we're going to talk a lot about this world that we've created and really emphasize what it is that we all can do to change that. My first book of this type, it's not my first book, but of this type, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, was my confessions. This next book, Secret History of the American Empire, includes stories by a lot of other economic hitmen and jackals, people who came out of hiding, who confessed to me, and I tell their stories. But to me, the most important part of this book is that it outlines a plan for turning all this around, for creating a world that Olivia and every child born in Ethiopia and everywhere else on this planet will be proud to inherit from us. Is this mic working? Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, great. So, but I'd like to start tonight by talking a little bit about how I became an economic hitman and what we economic hitmen do. And some of you may have already covered this territory if you read Confessions, but a quick review. Back when I was still in school in Boston, I decided that I didn't want to go to Vietnam and fight in that war. And so I was looking for alternatives, and my wife's father at the time was high up in the government, and a good friend of his was high up in the National Security Agency, the nation's most secretive and perhaps largest spy organization. Who knows how big it is. And so they arranged for an interview for me, and I went through a series of very intensive tests, lie detector tests, psychological tests. And the National Security Agency determined that I'd make a good economic hitman. And also they discovered several weaknesses in my character that they could use as hooks to pull me in. And I sort of think these weaknesses in my character are kind of like the three big drugs of our culture: power, money, and sex. Now remember, I was in my early 20s at the time. And who amongst us doesn't have at least one of those addictions? I happen to have all three at the time. But I also, shortly after I accepted a job with the NSA, I heard a Peace Corps recruiter. And he got me very excited about the idea of going to the Amazon, a place I'd always wanted to visit. So I called this guy high up at the National Security Agency. I was very frightened about calling him, and said to him, you know, even though I appreciate your offering me a job with the NSA, I'd really like to go to the Amazon with the Peace Corps. And to my surprise, he strongly encouraged me to do so. I know why now, because those people that I ended up with, Schwa, how many people here have seen a shrunken head or a picture of one? How many people here have visited the Schwa or the Atra? We got some Pachamama Alliance people here, do we? Ah, yes, we do. I'd always wanted to go to these places, and these people today are very strongly fighting our oil companies. So what I came to realize later was that my Peace Corps experience with these people was training to be an economic hitman. In any case, the Peace Corps sent me to a training camp in Southern California, Escondido, a nudist colony. This is funny. You guys are kind of, it's a little serious here, but this isn't exactly a serious conversation we're having here. It's just about the future of our planet. Anyway, a nudist colony was a good place to train for the Peace Corps because in the Amazon, because the Schwa people don't wear many clothes, or at least didn't in those days. But in any case, in this training camp, I spent 8 weeks learning Spanish. And if anybody here studied language, you know 8 weeks is not a lot of time to learn a language in. And because I graduated from business school, they also taught me about credit and savings co-ops, to be a specialist in credit and savings co-ops. And then they sent me to Ecuador, and deep into the Amazon, into Schwa territory. And as I was going hiking through the jungle for a couple of days, it's pouring rain, it's the rainforest, people are coming out, Schwa people coming out of the rainforest. I'm practicing my lousy Spanish on them, and appalled to discover that my Spanish is better than theirs. They don't speak Spanish. They speak Schwa. So I'm being sent in, taught Spanish to go in and work with people that don't speak Spanish. Next thing, I get to the community. There's a guy there who speaks Spanish. He's the school teacher, and I explained to him that I'm here to help him form credit and savings co-ops. You got it. The Schwa don't have money, you know. Currency doesn't last in the rainforest. In those days, they had absolutely no money. Everything was by barter. So this was my introduction to the government bureaucracy of the United States. And I very quickly learned that my vaunted education had absolutely nothing to offer these people, but they had a great deal to teach me. And it's been a very valuable experience for the rest of my life, that to learn about our connection with each other, with the earth, and the importance of looking out for future generations, because the Schwa, the Achwa, all indigenous people, that is their main concern in life, is how do we take care of the Olivias? How do we take care of the children of the planet? And I think that is the real challenge that faces us today. This really isn't about our concerns around global warming, or the ice caps melting, or, you know, are we going to have enough water for us tomorrow? Are the lands in Florida and parts of California going to be flooded? For our sake, the real concern here is what kind of a world are we creating for our children? And I think it's fair for us to say that we know that no child can have a good world unless every child does. We're a very small planet, and to understand that we cannot have homeland security until we define the homeland as being the entire planet. This is our home. And it's a pretty small home when you come right down to it. While I was in Ecuador, I was recruited by a vice president of a company called Charles T. Main. and he was in the Army Reserves, liaisoning with the intelligence community. So he had all the information from the NSA. There's a funny thing going on here. Recruited me to work for this company called Charles T. Main in Boston. And I went and I took the job. And then I was trained by this amazing woman named Claudine, who's described in detail in the books. She was very intelligent, very cunning, very seductive. She knew all my weaknesses and used them all and as a hook. And she also told me what economic hitmen do, what I would be expected to do. And in essence, what we do, what we've done since World War II on an increasing basis is to create the world's first truly global empire. And we've done it primarily without the military, through economics, through economic hitmen. And the way we work many ways, but perhaps the most common is that we will identify a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil. And then we arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never goes to the country. It goes to our big corporations like Bechtel across the water here. We're on that side of the water, aren't we? They go to our big corporations that build huge infrastructure projects in this country, power plants, industrial parks, highways and ports, things that benefit a few very rich people, as well as our own corporations, but don't help the majority of the people, because the majority of the people are not connected to the electrical grid. They don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, and they don't get to use the highways or the ports. But this country is left holding a huge debt, and this is by intention. So huge it can't possibly repay it. So at some point we go back and say, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Send troops to Iraq in support of ours. Most people in the United States seem to believe that these troops that went to Iraq from other countries went in support of Iraq. They didn't. Almost all of them went because they were blackmailed. Their countries were blackmailed into sending them. And in this way, we've created this empire. When we economic hitmen fail, which isn't very often, I failed in Panama with Omar Torrijos and in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos. I couldn't corrupt these two presidents, couldn't bring them around. And when we fail, the next step is to send in the jackals. And these are men who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. Both Omar Torrijos and Jaime Roldos were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals because I failed in my job. As we all know what happened to Allende and Arbenz and Lumumba and Diem and Mossadegh and so many others. And so we've created this empire, and we've done it in secret. Most of us living in the United States don't realize that this incredible prosperity that we enjoy here is built on an empire, is built on slavery and servitude and tremendous suffering. We don't stop to think about the fact that we represent less than 5% of the world's population, and we consume more than 25% of the world's resources. We create more than 30% of the world's pollution. It doesn't take a very brilliant economist, which I never claimed to be, to realize that that is a failed model. 5% of the world's population consuming 25% of its resources, creating more than 30% of its pollution. You can't sell that model to China that has 20% of the world's population, or India with 17%. You can't sell that model to Ethiopia, to Africa, to Asia, to Latin America, to the Middle East. It just doesn't work. It's a failed model. It's not working here. We must change it for the sake of the young children of the world, the unborn children. We absolutely must change it. I think I'd like to share with you one of the stories that is told in detail in in the Secret History of the American Empire that kind of outlines this process. In the late 1970s, there's a country called Seychelles, which is an island country off the east coast of Africa. It's a very important country to the United States because right there next door to it is a strategic air base, Diego Garcia, which is where our biggest sorties into Iraq and Afghanistan and parts of Africa are conducted out of. This air base was given to the United States by the British government in the 1970s as an uninhabited island. It was not uninhabited. More than 2,000 people lived on this island. MI6, British intelligence, and CIA disappeared these 2,000 people. This is now coming out. BBC is launching a major campaign to expose this. But back then it wasn't known. And James Manchin was the president of Seychelles, a very good friend of Big Oil, very good friend of the United States. He was overthrown in a bloodless coup in the late 70s by Francis René, a socialist, who threatened to expose this whole deal with the Seychelles and get us out of there. So we decided Francis René had to go. I was sent to Washington to meet with a bunch of admirals and generals retired who now were economic hitmen to prepare myself to go to the Seychelles and corrupt Francis René, bring him around. I was at the same year that I was working in both Panama and Ecuador with Torrijos and Roldos. But first we wanted to find out whether we really thought we could corrupt René, and so this is a long, fascinating story that's detailed in the book, but the short version is that the Seychelles had a very important diplomat in Washington, an older guy, probably younger than I am today, but anyway. He had a young wife, and one of these generals had observed at a diplomatic cocktail party that the young wife, at several cocktail parties, the young wife was not happy. And so a young economic hitman was sent in to compromise her. This happens a lot in this business. And there's a very interesting story in the book about what went on with all of that. But eventually he succeeded. And the message that came back was that Francis René could not be corrupted. There was no point in me even going to Seychelles. And so I was called off the case. And I knew full well that the next step would be the jackals. I didn't know what they were going to do. But a few months later, I turned on the national news on television, and I saw that there was a big gun battle at Mahi Airport in Seychelles. That people who had been attempting a coup had been surrounded, and they hijacked an Air India 707. A few of you out there are old enough to perhaps remember this. It was covered quite extensively in '81. They hijacked a 707, flew it to Durban, South Africa, gave themselves up, were sentenced to life in prison and execution. End of the story, as far as we knew. Well, I know the ringleader now of this very well. The guy who organized this hit squad out of South Africa. This was a hit squad of South Africans and US mercenaries, jackals, very, very highly skilled jackals, 45, 46 of them, who went in to not only kill René, but overthrow the government, a big coup. They posed as a rugby team, taking Christmas gifts to the children of the Seychelles, which is a primarily Catholic country. And another force of black Africans was prepared in Kenya to fly into Seychelles. Once the assassination had occurred, the coup had occurred, the jackals would dissipate, fly out on commercial airliners, and this group from many different countries in Africa would arrive on the scene and take credit. So the US government and South African government would not be implicated. The deal fell apart at Mahi Airport when an alert security guard discovered an AK-47 in some luggage. Huge gun battle broke out. The Tanzanians, known as Tanzuk, mercenaries who worked for René, surrounded the airport, and the jackals had fought before with the Tanzanians and knew that they were fierce, well-trained, well-disciplined warriors. They surrounded the jackals, and my friend, whose name is Jack, who happens incidentally today to be making a very large fortune, tax-free, in Iraq, working for the US government, doing things that the US government is not allowed to hire people to do. Jack told me that it was one of the few times in his life when he figured he would not get out alive and had time to think about it. Usually he didn't have time to think about it. You don't have time to react, and his reactions are usually very good. But they hijacked this Air India 707, flew it to Durban, which we all watched on the news. Once it was surrounded by the South African security forces, they got on the phone to the airplane and discovered that the 46 guys on the airplane, well, it's been reduced now to 59, 7 were left behind, taken captive in Seychelles, that these guys on the airplane were their drinking buddies and their teachers. These mercenaries who had gone in were the teachers of the highest security force. And so a deal was struck. These guys gave themselves up, they were put on trial, sent to prison in South Africa, given their own wing in the prison with lots of booze, television, women, whatever they wanted, and after 3 months, quietly released, every one of them. And a couple of dozen of them today are together in Iraq, working for you, on your taxpayer dollars, making a lot of money, and they make it tax-free. Now, that tells you a lot about how things work, but there's a little bit more to the story here even than that, because it sounds like a failure, doesn't it? Nobody did what they were supposed to do. Economic Hitman didn't do our job, Jackals failed, but actually it was a huge success. These 7 guys that were taken captive in the Seychelles, the president of South Africa sent $3 million to Francis Rene, and he released those guys, and he got $3 million. That same year, 1981, was the year when, in May of 1981, Jaime Roldos, because of my failure as an economic hitman, was assassinated by the Jackals. And that was in May. What?
Plane crash assassination.
Yes, plane crash assassination. Exactly the same plane, a Twin Otter, crashed 2 months later in Ecuador, killing Jaime Roldos, the president of Ecuador. And we know how the planes crashed. They were being guided from the ground. Their instrument panels were being disrupted, so they thought they were a lot higher than they truly were. Well, I don't know personally about Wellstone, but your guess is as good as mine. So in any case, Francis Rene was very aware of what happened to Jaime Roldos and Omar Torrijos. He was aware that his life was this close to ending and his government overthrown. He received $3 million and he became our friend. He never exposed Diego Garcia. As I mentioned earlier, the BBC is in the process of doing that today. And he never tried to throw us out. He served as president until 2002 when his vice president was elected president of Seychelles. And so, in fact, we won. And it's a good example of how this whole system works that most of us aren't aware of. I think one of the very, very deeply concerning aspects of this for me is that I've heard in recent elections about how our elections might have been stolen. I live in Florida. I live in Palm Beach County, Florida. Chads, stolen elections. But I don't really think that's nearly as big a threat to our democracy as the fact that most Americans have no idea about the most vital aspect of our foreign policy. And a democracy is based on a supposition that the electorate is informed. If we're not informed, if we don't understand this, how can we be a democracy? I don't think we are, not because the stolen elections are chads, but because most of us just don't know. And that's the main reason why I wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman and Secret History of the American Empire. So, just a couple of stories. There's a lot more of that type in these books, but I don't want to spend any more time on that. I would rather move into the more positive aspects of how do we change this? How do we turn this around? Because we absolutely must turn it around. We have to turn it around. We know this is a failed system. We know it cannot continue. We also know that empires always collapse. And when an empire collapses, a vacuum is created, wars occur, a new empire arrives, and we don't want that. We don't want this empire to collapse. We want to transform it. We want to shapeshift it. We want to change the dream. We want to change the perception. We want to change the paradigm. We must do that. And I think we're in a very unique position. We are a country with incredible ideals of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, ideals that everybody in the world respects. People often call presidents like Rafael Correa of Ecuador and Evo Morales of Bolivia and Hugo Chavez of Venezuela anti-American. I know all these people. They're not anti-American. They believe very strongly in our ideals. They are anti-exploitation. And you can think what you want about their personalities. I have a lot of trouble with Chavez's personality, frankly. But anti-American, he is not. Anti-exploitation, he is. And so we have these amazing ideals. We are an amazing people. We have incredible power around the world to influence the world. And so what I feel is that at this point in time, we are uniquely qualified and uniquely ready to truly establish a model that will create a world that is sustainable, stable, and peaceful. And we must recognize, and I say again, that the only way, I'm about to become a grandfather. September 20th, my daughter's due to deliver me a grandson. The only way my grandson is going to be able to expect to inherit a peaceful, sustainable, and stable world is if every child born in Botswana, in Bolivia, and in the Philippines has that same expectation. That is the only way. This is our homeland. This world is our homeland. So how do we create such a world? How do we go about doing it? And I think part of that question has to be answered. We have to look at the root causes. And the root causes to what we have right now are today's emperor. You know, an empire has to have an emperor. This isn't George Bush. Sorry to disappoint you. We've had the same emperor regardless of whether we have a Democrat or Republican in the White House or running Congress. It doesn't really matter from that global standpoint. It matters in many other ways. But the real emperor today, or the equivalent of the emperor, are a group of people I call the corporatocracy, the people who run our biggest corporations. They truly run the world. And every politician in this country is beholden to them. They finance all the political campaigns. I'm shocked to hear that in this next election, we've been told that both of the two final candidates, the Republican and Democrat alike, are going to have to spend $500 million. And I ask you, how much of that money is going to come from you or me? It's going to come from the corporations or those people who reap the profits of the corporations. And so our candidates really are beholden to the corporations. Our media is very beholden to the corporations, either owned outright by them or through advertising. And so it's the corporations that really are in charge here. When I grew up as a kid, we used to think of the globe as this big ball, you know, with 185 some odd countries. A few of them were very powerful, like the Soviet Union and the United States in those days, and then it just became the United States. We became the big powerhouse. But today, that's an archaic view of the world. Today, we can better see this as a globe that's surrounded by huge clouds that drift all around the globe and know no national boundaries. And these are the big corporations. They control everything. They work very closely with China, as well as with us, with India, with every government out there. They use whatever laws best suit them. And so it is those corporations that must be changed, that we must address. Today, those corporations have as their primary goal making a few rich people a lot richer in the short run. Today, next week, next month, this quarter. We must change that. The corporation is our most prominent community. Probably more of you, well, I don't know, I'm in Berkeley, maybe this isn't true here. But in every place else, more people relate to the corporation than any other community, than a town, a village, a city, a state, a country. Corporations run our lives. They are our main community. And so we must convince them that their primary job, their primary responsibility is to take care of us, to be good citizens, to be good communities, to take care of their employees, not only when they're employed, but when they retire also, to serve their customers, of course, and to take care of everybody around the world that serves that corporation. I just came from Portland early this morning, where, you know, Nike's prominent in Portland. Nike has these outrageous sweatshops around the world, and contrary to what Nike tells us, they're not getting any better. Nike needs to take care of those people in those sweatshops. I want nothing more than to wear the Nike swoosh proudly as a symbol of an organization that is creating a better world. And I intend in my lifetime to see that happen. And also Coca-Cola and every major corporation out there, we're going to make that happen. And so these corporations are the power base of the corporatocracy. They have a faulty goal, making a few rich people a lot richer. We need to change their goal to be good citizens, to take care of their communities all over the world. And I'm extremely optimistic that we can do this. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because there's people in this room who represent Rainforest Action Network, Pachamama Alliance, and other nonprofit organizations that are doing amazing jobs. Would anybody here who represents one of those organizations just stand up for a minute so we can all see you? Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. All right. These organizations and many others have had huge success at changing big corporations. Rainforest Action Network has never lost a campaign. And it's gone up against some of the biggest corporations in the world: Mitsubishi, Citicorp, Boise Cascade, Home Depot, Kinko's. Huge corporations, never lost a campaign. And up until very recently, it operated on a budget of about $2 million and 20 people on their staff, a lot of volunteers. I think they just came close to doubling it in the last year to 40 people and 4 million. Still very, very small. They've done amazing things. Pachamama Alliance is doing incredible things in South America and in a program here right in the Bay Area now in 15 countries with 500 teachers called the Awakening the Dreamer program. Google these or go to their websites, Pachamama, Pachamama.org, and Rainforest, is it RAN? RAN.org. And we've got flyers over here on a table if you don't want to write these things down. And so many other organizations that have done incredible things to change corporations. When I was at Boston University, I remember I couldn't walk next to the Charles River because it was so terribly polluted. It reeked. And we had rivers in this country on fire with pollution. No longer. Corporations cleaned them up. We were destroying the ozone layer with aerosol cans. No longer. Detroit resisted seat belts and then airbags for a long time. No longer. Corporations have opened their doors to minorities in a pretty big way, continuing to do that. Trans fats. McDonald's is committed and Kentucky Fried Chicken not to have trans fats in their foods anymore because we demanded it. Yesterday, full-page ad in the New York Times from what's the chicken people? Tyson, thank you. Tyson saying, because you, the consumer, asked for it, we will no longer produce antibiotic-fed chickens. They've ended that because we demanded it. We see this time and time again. We have tremendous power over these corporations. They depend on us to buy everything they produce. They depend on us to be their employees. And they're very susceptible to us. We must remember that all the leadership of these corporations, every CEO and every top management person and lower management person is a person with children probably, grandchildren, nephews and nieces. These are human beings. They are susceptible to us. We've had tremendous power. We've had tremendous success at turning them around whenever we've set our hearts and minds on doing it. And we've done it on some very specific issues, like the ones I've just discussed. Now we must get out there and tell them that they must change their very basic modus operandi. Instead of being there to make a few rich people richer, they must be there to create a world that Olivia and every child on this planet will be proud to inherit from us, a sustainable, peaceful, and stable world for all children everywhere. We must make that happen, and I know we can make it happen. And one of the reasons I'm so confident, I share a little story with you because we've been getting a little too serious here tonight, and I can see from the looks of your faces that You need a little story. So a few years ago, Rainforest Action Network went after Mitsubishi. Now, probably most people don't. Mitsubishi is a mammoth organization, and at that time it was considered the biggest and worst lumberer of rainforests and primary forests around the world. Rainforest Action Network went after them. And it became a relatively nasty campaign, let's say, at least from the standpoint of Mitsubishi. And at one point, Randy Hayes, founder and at that time CEO of Rainforest Action Network, Mike Bruin, who you just met, has that job now. But Randy Hayes and a senior executive at Mitsubishi clashed. They went head to head. They clashed horns. It was nasty between the two of them. And Rainforest Action Network won. Of course, they've never lost a battle, and I think now you're going after Exxon and Detroit, right? Amongst other things. Big oil companies. That's, yeah, it's fantastic. And you've never lost, so you're not going to lose this time. We know that. So Mitsubishi signs the agreement. And a few months later, I have the dubious good fortune of being at a conference in Santa Barbara with both these men, Randy Hayes and the vice president of, our senior executive from Mitsubishi. And it was interesting to me because there's only 30 people to this conference and up on this mountaintop. And these two men were obviously gravitating to opposite ends of the room every chance they had. You know, they weren't really quite sure. And I know we were all wondering why this Mitsubishi executive was there. We knew why Randy Hayes was there. We always came to these meetings, but this is the first time Mitsubishi showed up. Why is this guy here? You know, like, anyway, Randy and I on Saturday night decided that we would take a six-pack of beer and go up to the top of the mountain and enjoy the hot tub up there and watch the full moon rising over the Pacific. And Randy thinks he's got some pretty good stories about the Amazon, but I know mine are a lot better. So we were going to go up there to exchange stories and see who could really, you know, outlie the other guy. We climb up the hill with our six-pack and we get there and the hot tub wasn't empty. There was one other guy in it. Well, this Mitsubishi executive, I'm sure, didn't want to do this, but what else could he do except say, well, guys, come on in. So we take off our clothes and put our six-pack on the edge and climb in. And I got to admit, I was a little anxious getting in naked with these two guys that had locked horns with all this beer flowing and a full moon rising over the Pacific. I could think of a lot of other people I'd rather have shared that hot tub with that night. But in any case, as the night went on and we had a few more beers, the Mitsubishi executive raises his can to Randy and he says, this really hits me, he says, Randy, I got to thank you. You know, you made life pretty tough for us for a while, but I want to tell you, I'm a father. I'm going to be a grandfather. I love rainforests. I want my children to visit the Amazon and the great forests of British Columbia. Me and a whole bunch of other executives at this company wanted to do the right thing for a long time, but we didn't dare. We were afraid we'd lose our jobs, be replaced by tougher people than us. But when you and your people at Rainforest Action Network exposed us, came after us, hung banners from our buildings, put ads in newspapers, brought this to the attention of our stockholders and our executive committee and our board of directors, and we created a committee that said we have to address this problem, you gave us the opportunity to do the right thing. And I submit to you that this is a story that goes on and on and on across the world, that our corporations and places like the World Bank are filled with good people. I've known a lot of CEOs in my life. I've never known an evil one. And I don't say there aren't evil ones. There probably are. There are probably a few pathological personalities running corporations, but I suspect that's about the same percentage of CEOs as it is the general population. These are people. They're very susceptible. They want to do the right thing. I don't know any CEO that wants to have Florida flooded or wants to have the ozone layer destroyed. I don't know any CEO that wants to see terrorism continue on this planet. These people are looking for a reason to do the right thing, and it's you and I who must give them that reason. And it doesn't take a lot. With Mike Bruin at dinner tonight, Mike was saying to me, I don't think most people realize how easy it is to bring these corporations around. Now, that isn't to say it doesn't take work. Mike and his people work hard. But it's very, very doable. And now we need to ratchet it up a notch. Not just save rainforests, and not just save the ozone layer, and not just create more jobs for minorities, et cetera, and get antibiotics out of chickens. We need to ratchet this up a notch and say, listen, if you corporations can set as your primary goal to be good citizens, to create a good planet for every child, there goes another little baby out the door right now, and every time I see this, it brings this home so clearly. To create a good planet for all the children, then everything else will start to fall into place. And we can look to these models. Rainforest Action Network, the Civil Rights Movement, the Women's Rights Movement, Pachamama Alliance, these organizations, Conservation International, there's so many that have done so much. And so I guess what this comes down to at this point is you, me. What can you do? What can I do? What can we do together? My goal here tonight, the only reason I'm really on this speaking tour is, you can probably tell I don't enjoy standing up in front of a group of people talking. I do, actually. It's fun being with you. Get to meet such wonderful people. But my goal here tonight, the reason I really do this is because I'm hoping that every one of us will leave here tonight committed, absolutely committed, to begin tonight and continue every day to do one thing, at least one thing every single day, to make this a sustainable, peaceful, and stable planet for everyone, everywhere, because it can't be that way for anyone, anywhere, unless it's that way for everyone, everywhere. So we must ask ourselves, well, what can we do? What can you do? And in The Secret History of the American Empire, which is conveniently up here with this ominous-looking guy with the sunglasses, there's a long list of things we can all do. And most of you already know these things. You know, you drink water out of the pitcher, good Berkeley water. It's interesting, not from Fiji. It's interesting traveling around the country, the different bouquets. I was in Chicago and then Seattle and Portland and now Berkeley, and it's really fun. It's like trying microbrews or good wines. Full-bodied. Good water. So, drive efficient cars. Don't buy anything made by Nike until that swoosh comes to represent something different from what it represents today. Don't buy anything made in sweatshops. We know these things. There's a list of things. Support these organizations. If you like rainforests, support Rainforest Action Network. Give them your time, volunteer for them, or give them some money, whatever you can do. If you like indigenous people, Pachamama Alliance. If it's animals, support animal rights. But get involved with organizations that are doing good things, because they're very, very powerful. Those things are all on this list. But above all, we each must do what most appeals to us. Every one of you has a passion. You have a passion, and you have talent. I'm a writer. It's my passion. I hope I have some talent as a writer. Whatever you are, whatever you do, you have tremendous passion and talent. And I can't tell you exactly what to do with that passion and talent. I'm not going to offer you, the pink pill for stomach digestion and the white one for a headache. And I'm like a corporation telling you what to do. But each of you has incredible passions and talents. And I grew up in rural New Hampshire. I come from 400 years of Yankee Calvinist, 400 years. My ancestors fought in the American Revolution and every major war since. I'm a real patriot. I love this country. I'm very loyal to it. I know we can do better than what we've been doing. But growing up in rural New Hampshire and steeped in the lore of the American Revolution, which my mother did extensively with me, I came to realize that we should all be extremely thankful that Tom Paine did not try to lead armies, and George Washington didn't write pamphlets. And Benjamin Franklin didn't do either. He was in his 70s, and he went off to France and convinced the French to become our allies. Paine wrote pamphlets. That was his passion and his talent. And George Washington was a damn good leader of men, even though he lost every battle for a couple of years, and didn't try to write pamphlets. And Benjamin Franklin did his thing. And everyone out there, the women made the clothes and molded the bullets. The children molded the bullets. And the Gloucester fishermen became the Navy. They didn't wait for someone to tell them what the right thing to do was. They knew what they could do and where their passions were. And each one of us must be that way. I saw a cartoon just the other day that was these humanized sheep, sheep on two legs. They were at a cocktail party. And the first sheep says, "Well, what should we drink?" And the next sheep says, "Do you think we ought to dance?" And the next sheep says, "Is it time to have a conversation?" And the last sheep points at the doorway where there's a big dog standing in the doorway, and he says, "Oh, thank God the border collies finally arrived." It's time to stop being the sheep. It's time to stop listening to the border collie to tell us what to do. Each of you, you know what you can do. You know where your passions are and your talents. And I often think about people in my generation, which is the 30 and older generation. You think I look younger than that? That way you're laughing? We can no longer be fired. We don't need to worry about our kids anymore. Well, we may worry about them, but we don't need to. There's not much we can do. This is our time to go out there and be courageous and have a hell of a lot of fun changing the world, making it a good place. And for you younger people, this is a good time to really make that commitment that this is what you're going to spend your life doing, because nothing can be more fun. Nothing can be more gratifying than making this a better world for ourselves and future generations. This is a time for tremendous courage. I also often think of how the patriots in the American Revolution were terrorists, insurgents. They went up against the most powerful empire in the history of the world, the British Empire, and it happened to be their government. Does that resonate? And every one of them stuck their head in the news. George Washington, Arthur Washington, Tom Paine, Thomas Jefferson, they all would have been hanged if they lost the American Revolution. And these were not desperate poor people any more than you are. There was nothing desperate about George Washington. He was the wealthiest man in the colonies, or Patrick Henry, or John Hancock, or Thomas Jefferson. And we know now, history tells us that all the farmers in the 13 colonies were better off than the farmers in Europe by a long shot. They weren't desperate people, but they knew that they had to create a better world for future generations, and they had the courage to go out and do it. And this is where we are today. So what can you do? Well, there's that list, and it behooves all of us to do the right thing every day in the way we shop and join organizations. But search your soul. What is it? What is your passion? What are your talents? Growing up in rural New Hampshire, I had no idea that African Americans in parts of my country had to ride in the back of the bus until Rosa Parks showed me. Who the hell was Rosa Parks? She's you. Every one of us can sit on the front of a bus. It may take a little courage, but we could do it. And I had no idea that the DDT we were spraying on those mosquito-infested swamps behind my house was killing birds and fish until Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. Got rid of DDT and started a whole environmental movement. Who the hell was Rosa, what's her name? Rachel Carson. Who was she? She's you. She's me. And, I think about my history teacher in high school, my third grade teacher, and teachers, people that had tremendous impact. Every one of you impacts dozens of people every single week. You impact people every single day in the way you shop, in the way you do things, in the things that you say. So let's see that as an opportunity every day to create a world that our children will be proud to inherit, a sustainable, peaceful, and stable world because we are in the position today to make that happen. And the alternative is simply not acceptable. And so I'm going to bring this formal talk to a close pretty soon, and we'll move into some questions and answers, discussion, whatever. But before I do that, I just emphasize again, I think what we all need to do is move more toward awareness. The Awakening the Dreamer program at Pachamama Alliance is about that. And then take action. We need to act. We need to follow up with actions. I like to quote a little bit of Shakespeare. Shakespeare had some very pithy statements at the end of his plays. Of course, he didn't say anything pithy during the rest of his plays. It was pretty boring and dull. But at the end, he managed to come up with good... I'm just kidding. Obviously. At the end of King Lear, Shakespeare says, and as I'm reading this, keep in mind those sheep at the cocktail party. The weight of this sad time we must obey. The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. Don't be those sheep. This is the time to move forward. Together, you and I, together we must do the right thing, and it is the practical thing, the pragmatic thing. We must turn this world around. You and I must change consciousness. We must move into a new perception, a new dream, if you will. We must create a world that will make our children proud to inherit this world, proud to inherit this world from us, a world that is sustainable, peaceful, and stable. And so I look forward to moving into this time with you. As we leave here tonight, let's make a commitment, every one of us, to see to it that this is what happens. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, just before we move into questions and answers, I'm just wondering whether there's anybody here from Pachamama Alliance who would like to say anything about the Awakening the Dreamer program or how people could participate in that if they wanted to. Stacy?
How many participate? We've got microphones. Pachamama Alliance has programs in Ecuador, primarily with indigenous people, which John referred to, very inspiring work we're doing there. We also have a program in the rest of the world, and that is to have the rest of the world change our way of living that's driving the destruction of the rainforest. The name of the program in this part of the world is called Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream. And you can find out where there's a local presentation of this Awakening the Dreamer Symposium near you. We have, as John said, 360 people trained, people like us trained all around the world right now, not all around the world, in a number of countries around the world. We're going out into their communities and delivering a 4 to 6 hour presentation, a symposium, which I just have to say people are responding extremely enthusiastically to. So I would send you to the Awakening the Dreamer website, and the office is just over at the Presidio, and there you'll find out the listing of all these symposiums in this area and actually everywhere else we're doing them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you. And there's a table over here with some flyers with stuff if people are looking for it. Is there anything else we need to say about Rainforest Action Network?